starts out, my name is David and I'm a black American. Black American now as opposed to African American. I worked hard here to become black. Penn was a good place to work hard to become black because there was a lot of stuff going on. But to go from that to now, to understand, by the way, there were some of the boys who came back to the dormitory that night were from SAS, and they came to my room, 2 o'clock in the morning, and we had another frank exchange of views. No blows were thrown. But 2 nights later, I got a little invitation to meet up with the brothers at 40th and Spruce. So I put on my jock strap with the cup, just in case things got rough. And I went up, and it was the brothers of A.E. Pi, and they wanted to talk to me about the fraternity. I had to change my mind real fast about a lot of things in a hurry at Penn. I'm going to shut up now, but I've got to say one more thing. 2 years ago now, I read an article in the Washington Post about President Gutmann, who mentioned him. I'll just read the beginning of it to you. A Pennsylvania police union is slamming University of Pennsylvania President Amy Gutmann after officers witnessed her participation in a die-in protest led by students. Ms. Gutmann lay on the floor with student protesters after they disrupted a holiday party at her home Tuesday, their demonstration symbolizing the 4 hours that the body of Michael Brown remained on the street after he was shot by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported. Police officers who were working at the party and witnessed Ms. Gutmann's participation were outraged, Penn Police Association President Eric Rohrbach said in a letter published in the Daily Pennsylvanian, the student newspaper. I am appalled that the president of this fine university would give in to the pressure of the uninformed mob mentality surrounding the Michael Brown case and participate in a die-in, he wrote. Our president is fond of calling us her officers and publicly states that she will always support us. To have her participate in such a disrespectful act is not in any way support and proves that she does not have the backs of her officers. It is a slap in the face of every person that wears the uniform and serves this university. I've got 2 things to say. Bravo, President Gutmann. And 2, in the immortal words of NWA, that's after they became rebranded. They used to be niggas with attitude. Fuck the police.
Glad everyone's making it here. A little bit of, in New Orleans when it rains, everything's 2 hours late. I knew that wouldn't work at Penn, but I'm glad everyone has been able to get in here, and it's just great. I have to say, it's just great to see all the faces and all the acknowledgments and nods of speakers. And we're going to have one more speaker and then try and open this up a little bit. If you haven't read the tremendous volume of narratives that Jeff Rothbard put together as one of his many amazing accomplishments as our class president, I highly recommend the one called Ivy Stoned and Other Adventures by Kate Gable. Kate has a lot of interesting things she's done in her life. One of the things she did was, without a whole lot of training in design, designed our class Ivy Stone, and you need to check that out. She's a distinguished essayist, poet, and columnist. Has won a number of awards out in the Great Northwest in just a variety of ways. She was a magna cum laude graduate in English and Psych. She spent some time working at the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank as doing marketing. She's been a humanities chair and has an MA from the University of Washington that involves her work as literature and poetry. A recent MFA in poetry from Pacific Lutheran University. She's been an environmental journalist. Every time I get an email from her, I'm amazed at how poetic the lines are about what she's doing and where she's headed. She lives in, I probably shouldn't try and say this without a pronouncer, Nakata, Washington?
Perfect.
All right. And Paris, is that Paris, Texas? Sorry. Paris, France. And my favorite place where she winters is Oracle, Arizona. That's all right, Kate. That's good. I think of you out on the land and your words and all your memories and experiences, and I'm delighted you're here. So, please.
Thanks, Nick. Well, it's a dangerous position to be the capped speaker after this distinguished. I'm going to use distinguished too, but I'll tell you an inside joke about that, because Jeff wrote some description about me that used that adjective distinguished, and then he wrote me back and said, you know, don't let your head get too fluffed out of shape. It's just another word for old. So that's how we started. Jeff did a fantastic job herding the cats, though, on this reunion. So again, kudos to you, Jeff. Yeah.
We're going to start chanting 5 more years.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't want to disrupt it.
It feels sort of like weaving a rug here, because the themes that have been tossed out are certainly themes that have woven through my life too. I came from a tiny town in central Washington, Yakima, known as the Fruit Bowl of the nation. And I came too because I had, for some reason, a recruiter showed up at my high school, and I ended up getting a scholarship and therefore did not go to Reed, which was where I thought I wanted to go. But this choice to come east was probably the best thing I could have done at that point, because I didn't know anything about the Jewish people I knew, the black people I knew. I knew nothing about race, class. I got a political education at Penn that was sort of unprecedented in a way, opened my eyes up. I did spend one night in College Hall. And I was one of those sort of naive but fairly smart kids who was doing well in a small pond and suddenly came to the large pond of Penn and was really challenged academically. And again, it was the intellectual rigor here, both from the professors and the other students, was something that I definitely have taken with me through my life. One of the first things I did was buy a little bicycle and paint eyeballs on it and crazy things, and ended up driving from Walnut Hall, which was an old hotel. I've met a couple of you who were in Walnut Hall. To across the Schuylkill to the Art Museum. And God knows why I wasn't hit over the head at some point there, because I had no idea, you know, anything about the neighborhoods I was driving through. But to go to a world-class museum like that with my little sketchbook and to see the objects of art there, again, was an eye-opener for me. I knew that my life was going to be about words. I had decided that in 2nd grade. So I majored in English, but as Nick was saying, I took that degree into the business world. I was an MBA professor at a certain point in time because I wrote a book on strategic planning after being an IT consultant in the early days of the internet. When I left Penn and went back to Washington, I don't know, do we have any other Pacific Northwesterners here? A couple, okay. So the beauty of our state, the Washington state, is hard to describe to folks who are used to an urban environment, I think. And it's why right now I live in this tiny town, Nakata, which is a 30-mile long spit at the mouth of the Columbia River, 2.5 miles wide, with the Pacific Ocean on one side, Willapa Bay on the other. It's absolutely stunning. And right now, those spring salmon are coming up the river. We still have a few salmon runs left. And there's nothing like a salmon that is right out of the river. You know where it's caught. You know who has caught it. And it's on your plate in a little cafe a mile down the road within maybe 3 or 4 hours of its coming out of the water. So when I came back to Washington, again, I wandered around as a English department chair of the Big Island of Hawaii. I worked for a sustainability and business company called the Future 500 in the Bay Area for a long time. But this is the environment is it's a foundation for me. And one of the profound sadnesses I have right now is that we're so adaptable as humans that we don't understand how little by little by little we're losing that environment. And we have a president right now who just seems to want to, but shit on every possible environmental policy that will save the places that we love. It's sort of heartrending to be aware right now and see what's happening around us. But I'm a country girl, but I'm also a city kid too. And that's why I've got these bookends of this tiny little place in the middle of nowhere and Paris, which is where I go for my culture, where I go to visit my literary friends, and where, again, I can visit world-class museums, hear literature, and really soak myself and saturate myself in the kind of urban culture which started for me in Philadelphia, in fact. So these two things, these bookends for me are part of what I weave together in my own life. Gosh, there's so many things I could mention. Does anybody remember flaming bungees? Wow, not one person. Oh, what, really? Fantastic. I'll just mention this one thing because I don't know why. I don't know why it was appealing to us, but every once in a while on the 8th floor of Walnut Hall, we would announce there was going to be a flaming bungee, let's say at the end of the week. And what you had to do was gather up cleaner bags and tie those together into a little thing that you'd hang from, in our case, the light at the top of the ceiling. And then you had a bucket of water at the bottom. And then you would light that thing. And as the plastic burned and dripped, it would make this amazing kind of zzzt sound, and then sort of like a Doppler effect into that bucket of water. This was before we started smoking marijuana, by the way. Anyway, people came to our room for flaming bungees. Maybe you were there, I don't know. But
Baltimore Avenue.
okay.
3965.
Okay. All right. So from flaming bungees to A Night in College Hall 2, I'm going to end with a poem here. This is, I just recently got my MFA in poetry, so I'm coming back to something that's my heart work now after, as you can see, a life that was sort of a jigsaw puzzle. Although I still write a column for our weekly newspaper. This is by Ellen Bass. Relax. Bad things are going to happen. Your tomatoes will grow a fungus, and your cat will get run over. Someone will leave the bag with the ice cream melting in the car and throw your blue cashmere sweater in the dryer. Your husband will sleep with a girl your daughter's age, her breasts spilling out of her blouse, or your wife will remember she's a lesbian and leave you for the woman next door. The other cat, the one you never really liked, will contract a disease that requires you to pry open its feverish mouth every 4 hours. Your parents will die. No matter how many vitamins you take, how much Pilates, you'll lose your keys, your hair, and your memory. If your daughter doesn't plug the heart into every live socket she passes, you'll come home to find your son has emptied the refrigerator, dragged it to the curb, and called the used appliance store for a pickup. Drug money. There's a Buddhist story of a woman chased by a tiger. When she comes to a cliff, she sees a sturdy vine and climbs halfway down, but there's also a tiger below, and 2 mice, one white, one black, scurry around and begin to gnaw at the vine. At this point, she notices a wild strawberry growing from a crevice. She looks up, she looks down, she looks at the mice. So here's the view, the breeze, the pulse in your throat. Your wallet will be stolen. You'll get fat. Slip on the bathroom tiles of a foreign hotel and crack your hip. you'll be lonely. Oh, taste how sweet and tart the red juice is. How the tiny seeds crunch between your teeth. Thanks very much.
So, I am responsible for pulling these mugshots out. I didn't put mine up there. I'll find it in a minute. I didn't mean to ignore it. I think that there was something. By the time our yearbook came out, the art of the yearbook had gone into decline. To me, the yearbook was sort of the record version of the architectural superblock or something. It had gotten pretty minimalist, not very attractive, but I didn't mean for everyone to look like they were, mugshots. Of course, Ira as a BMOC, he was depicted in action, but that year's yearbook was like, hey, got a lot of good stuff going on campus. So I'm going to find that in a moment, but while I'm doing that, I just want to acknowledge somebody I worked with for many years at WXPN. Andy Baum was the station manager, and I think we had one hell of a radio station. And Carol's going to speak this afternoon. Carol, are you here? No? She'll speak this afternoon about her days there and MMR and NEW in New York. And we could do WXPN. Laura, I know there's a couple of folks here talking about the reunions and all the things that we learned. Trying to take our knowledge of music on those shelves and then doing what we had to do to curate that material for broadcast, essentially going from the archive to the big world. And it was incredibly instructive for all of us in lots of different ways, and some people continued in radio, some did many other things, but we remember good old XPN, and I was very happy this year that after 12 years on WHYY, American Roots moved to WXPN. And as some of you probably know, I was not thrilled with the transformation to a non-student station in many ways, and there was over the years been some dust-ups about that, but I really admire how they've evolved and what they're doing and what the radio environment is in the city these days, and it's good stuff, but I suppose myself, and I always called them the Bauman, would always think that the best days at XPN were then. I hate to be an antiquarian about that, but then again, I got to do American Roots, so I get to channel XPN every week, along with other things that I learned along the road. So there's a lot of folks here who, we could just tell marijuana stories alone. We've heard a lot of demonstration and political stories. The floor is open to anyone that wants to say something, and just speak up. Do we have mics, or what are we doing? And just speaking up, I guess. Should be fun. It's like a Quaker meeting where we're speaking the line. No, you don't have to wait that long. Those are silent for an awfully long time sometimes. But anyone, because okay, I was going to call the guy next to you if you didn't raise your hand. Yes, say who you are and say, just tell us what you want to say.
Chris Gerber, class of 72, English major, and I've been living in London for the last 20 years, and grown increasingly interested in music and the cultural ethos around music. And Nick, as somebody who's clearly a great student of the subject, I'd be interested to hear what common roots and where the roots are different between the, if you will, the British music, the pop music of the 60s and 70s, putting aside those four celebrated guys from Liverpool. Now that's not me.
With the question, I figured I'd better point it out. Right?
So, any thoughts on the subject?
Well, at XPN there was a definite Anglophile orientation to groups in that period, like Fairport Convention and ones that built on the folk tradition. To a lesser extent, the British hair bands, as we called them, not counting the Beatles, but or the classic split between the Beatles as music hall, classical showmanship versus the Rolling Stones, who were so much about electrifying blues and channeling, the Muddy Waters classic song about the catfish, boy child come going to be a Rolling Stone. I mean, there was that was a split that went on there, and I think persisted when you think about the quote British invasion. But I always thought the British invasion was used American armaments because the Beatles were all doing Chuck Berry and Little Richard and early on. Of course, the Rolling Stones were doing, you know, Muddy Waters, Irma Thomas from New Orleans, you know, all kinds of African American music was filtered through them. You know, where are the roots these days? Well, I call the show ROUTES, if you didn't know, and the metaphor is really the metaphor of search, discovery, and travel. You know, some people say routes, but there's 3 pronunciations in America. The ROOTS homonym is more common in some parts of the country, but then we say Route 1. When I interviewed Dolly Parton, she said, well, you know, when I talk about roots, I'm talking about going to the hairdresser. We say routes where I grew up. But my point is that there's a notion of roots, ROOTS, that really is an old Eurocentric idea, I think, of, you know, one culture on a landscape with continuity through time. It's an organic metaphor of the pastoralist and keeping connected to the earth. And it's a very appealing metaphor. The natural metaphors are fabulous in our lives, you know. We root for sports teams with all kinds of names of animals, and we, you know, think about the roots as something that has dignity and continuity, and the big A word, no, not adultery, authenticity. And so that's that. But I think of American culture as expansive and exploring, you know, but travel is not always great. Migration is brutal in many cases. The Third Passage is brutal. But then again, there's Jack Kerouac and Woody Guthrie traveling the landscape. Everyone told a little travel tale about how they did or didn't get to Penn or somewhere, even today. And so I focused on that. By the way, the other pronunciation is the New Orleans and Brooklyn pronunciation of the word is roots. And Dr. John, when I interviewed him, said, you know, Nick, doesn't matter if it's a route, a route, or a root, as long as you're not in a rut. But I, you know, and I think of Ray Charles maybe as my favorite example of roots, ROUTES, in the sense that, you know, Ray grows up not sighted, you know, learns classical music and reads it, classical music notated in Braille at the School for the Blind and Deaf in Florida. But he grows up pretty much with a honky-tonk juke joint blues. Mr. Pickett taught him how to play the piano. And then, you know, his mom's side, which was all about gospel, classic split in that world, in that community. But what does Ray Charles do? He invents something new. It's both sacred and secular. It's called soul. And the soul speaks to the human experience, and it is neither rooted in the blues fully or rooted fully in the sacred gospel music, but it's a new invention rooted in both. And I've always been most interested in our lives and the things that have synthesized and created some new sense of authenticity and tradition. And yet they're created, in this case, by a genius individual. It's always referred to as genius and soul. You could take the Ray Charles story and multiply it times thousands of great artists who've done that sort of thing. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but my view in the radio show is keep all these sounds and stories available to people, both the stuff from early 20s and 30s, 78s up to the current moment, and people are making music in some direction. And, you know, we make aesthetic decisions as much as ethnographic or historical decisions to entertain people. You know, we learned how to entertain people at XPN and MMR. So anyway, I'm not sure if that answers, but I know people ask me about that.
I will try to summarize that answer on my flight back to London. Very much.
No worries.
Great comments from everybody. I thought they were lovely, eloquent, touching, and profound. So
Thank you.
everybody, great.
This Dorian, come on, tell us something, man.
say something.
Come on, Dorian.
The one thing, I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm seeing all these hairy eyeball wild activists up here on the panel. You know, they're obviously the representatives of the dynamic of the times. They are changing, and at the same time, I got to dip into a lot of different pools when I was here at Penn, but also you know, the surroundings in Philadelphia. I struck it all up, for those of you who didn't read the piece that I put down, it was called Pickup Artists, because I spent a lot of time at Gimbal and the pickup games and going around playgrounds around Philadelphia, and that was a big influence in my development, in addition to all the maybe seemingly more substantive stuff that I know. But I know there are lots of guys in this audience and over here at Ken, you know, who came into this dynamic of change, and in many respects probably maybe had what we consider, air quotes, a conventional college experience. You know, they played sports, they put their nose to the grindstone. And so it would be interesting, I think, to go around the room to some of those individuals and hear their reflections of how this, and this is what, and I think it was a little bit lost, that the transition from the 60s to the 70s as opposed to the rest of our lives, you know, how did that impact really fall upon you during that period of time?
Dorian, let me
And you know who you are, the
Yeah.
people that I've been.
Well, let's point out that Dorian was involved in Earth Week, which he mentioned, and you're now the Director of Sustainability for Suffolk County? And so, in a sense, I'm thinking of Iris' journey, where, you know, somebody has a lot of strong feelings about, in this case, environment, ways people need to
It
live.
wasn't just environment, you know, I was on the Speakers Bureau of Gene McCarthy for President 68.
Right.
I worked with
Very politically active.
Worked with Harold Leakey.
Right.
You know, the whole shebang.
But I mean, but you're carrying very heavy water for a major, you know, urban suburban county, and it does feel to me that you've been able to channel your political concerns into what you do all the time, and I find that incredibly admirable. I'm personally.
But I think what you manifest, and I don't want this to turn into a romance as we go back, is the premise that you've got to fall in love with your passion, and by your reckoning, you know, even when you were like dirt poor, I'm sure you weren't that dirt poor, you know, you still like, you know, hooked it through, and at the end you were rewarded. You were rewarded with all, you know, these wonderful circumstances. And I know Dave to a certain extent, and Dave's my freshman roommate.
Yeah, how about that?
Also,
Oh, let's talk about you guys as roommates, right? Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah.
But anyway, look, as I said, I would love to hear from maybe a guy like, you know, Ken, reflecting on the challenge that I just threw out there, and take it from there.
Ken Fetter, and
Speak up.
I was able to enjoy 8 years here. I continued after undergraduate education, you know, dental school here in Penn. And I came from a New Jersey community also, down outside Atlantic City. And Nick and I were actually neighbors, Lake Hanson, and neighbors, and grew up together from many days and years before this. And we grew up in an affluent community. Coming here to Penn in '68, I think it gave us an opportunity to obviously enjoy a whole variety of things here at Penn. I was in the Kappa Sig fraternity, so obviously you know what Kappa Sig was. It was a jock house. I was an athlete, came here as a football player initially with Malone and some others. But I just found the diversity of what we had as an opportunity here was incredible. I, you know, again, stayed here for 8 years and ended up teaching the dental school for 4 years. I lived outside Philadelphia here. And I'm just really glad that I had this red and blue experience. It was a opportunity to take advantage of a whole variety of opportunities here at Penn. And, you know, I appreciate the opportunity that I had to hear you folks here that have given a wonderful presentation. Jeff has been absolutely excellent. I've worked with Jeff on the committee, and it was quite an experience. I don't think I've met anybody that's quite as organized as Jeff and as committed as Jeff has been to this class. So, again, thank you for everybody's participation.
You know, I'm glad you brought up, you know, the profession too. I mean, I'll admit, I realized I was a freshman in Wharton, and I realized I love economic theory, but I don't want to be a business guy. I don't want to be a lawyer. I just want to be happy. It was such a 60s, 70s vibe. But, you know, I always tell people at my university, where we're so segmented in liberal arts sometimes and judgmental of the world, I just say, you know, you can be a humanist, you can be an accountant. You can be a humanist anywhere you are in life and help people and feel connected to people. And I think one of the good things here, sir, we did have so many opportunities, you know, to help people and learn how to be an adult. And that was a challenging time to do that. But thank you for that comment.
Got one down here.
Oh, okay.
I want to say that my experience here at Penn was a really wonderful one. I came to Penn from inner city Baltimore, which in the 60s was a hotbed of craziness. And unfortunately, the city in some ways has not changed a whole lot. You know, it's a place where you get stuck in a place, and if you don't break out, you're doomed to repeat that and stay there forever. I came here, and one of the more unique things that happened to me in my experience at Penn was the start of a real love for other cultures. I took one semester and went to the Pahlavi University. I was working at Mission's office as a work study student and kept going by this office every day. And I looked at the bulletin board one day and it said, scholarships available to go to Pahlavi University. And that time we would take, I was a semester ahead because it changed from a 5-course to 4 courses, and I got a semester to below. And the wonderful thing was that I could convert all my financial aid plus money from them, and I spent a semester in Shiraz, Iran, for one semester from September of 1971 to December, which by my reckoning was certainly the beginning of the revolution there. Lots of crazy, and a real wonderful experience. I think but for being here at Penn, I never would have done it. It's ignited my love of travel, my interest in other cultures, and in understanding how much this culture in particular has changed other cultures. When I was there, they wanted to know all about the student revolution here, the Black revolution here. And it was a powerful influence around the world that I think we don't often understand. But I have Penn to thank for that wonderful experience, which my mother didn't appreciate, but I did.
Kate wanted to comment
I
on the
just-
photo. We'll take one more question.
I
Okay?
just
Or
wanted to
comment.
say that another revolution that was happening here was a feminist revolution too, and I wanted this picture back up because one of the things that struck me about SDS was that if you were a woman there, what you were doing was making coffee mostly. So I don't know, there's maybe one woman in this photo, but that was the other thing that was beginning. During that time, there were a lot of things working under the surface, and one of them was our own revolution as women and who we were and who we could be in a political framework.
Yeah.
Margaret.
I don't know if you remember Phyllis Panis, our president.
Yes.
Let's make
When we
that.
graduated, she
Yes,
made
this one.
women's signs out of white paper for a lot of us to wear on our mortar boards. So there are photos of our graduating class from above that show groups of women with women's signs pasted
Yes,
on top or
yes.
pasted on top of our mortar boards.
Right.
And I came out of convention center wherever we graduated, and my mother said, "Oh my God, did you see those women with those women's signs?" I was so horrified, and I took off my hat and said,
There's-
"Hi, Mom."
Yeah.
That was really strong. The year we graduated, that was a really strong year for the women's movement at Penn,
Absolutely.
which really was the first movement I felt I could get totally behind.
Yeah. Well, we are at time. I'm glad you brought that up, and you as well, Kate. And we tried to touch as much as we could on a little bit of everything. But when you're dealing with 45 years in between and everything that happened, this is an ongoing discussion. And we can do some of that now as we break, and I hope we'll all stay in touch in different ways and carry forward. And just thanks for coming, and thanks to the whole panel here. Really appreciate it. Great to see you.
A couple quick announcements, but first I want to thank Nick and the panel. For those of us who were fortunate to go to the 40th, Nick did a discussion at that one as well. In 5 years, he'll be the lead speaker once again if we're both still around. So, 5 more years, Nick.
I gotta check my calendar.
Anyway, a couple of announcements about the rest of the day. The parade is on.
Oh,
It is on. You're going to get wet.
it's like New Orleans.